Kurt, I'd like to start with you because Adam Schiff is now calling on President Biden to step aside. But yet this call for a delay on the virtual roll call vote has been rescinded. I don't think most Americans follow all of the back and forth. But what is going on here? I mean, how big is this divide within the Democratic Party right now?
Well, I think what's interesting about Senate candidate Congressman Schiff here is it's well known that he is very close with another prominent Democrat, Nancy Pelosi. And I don't believe that he would have taken this very public, visible step without having consulted in some way with the former speaker and in many ways someone who, I think is perceived to be by most of the Democratic Party, one of the prominent de facto leaders and one of the people who, if she were to engage in this conversation more visibly, publicly, could move the needle substantially. And if Pelosi comes out and says that she thinks Biden should step aside from running for re-election, an avalanche of Democrats would follow her. And I think Schiff, being one of the more prominent Democrats of the 20 plus that have come forward so far, the fact that it's him and that he's so close to Pelosi, this could be the start of something substantial. And
I would ask if you think Pelosi will come out, but I think we have seen in this election cycle that it's hard to really predict anything. Denise, I'd like to throw it over to you. Joe Khalil was talking about it there in Milwaukee. We know JD Vance is set to speak tonight. It'll be his first speech as the vice presidential nominee. What do voters need to hear? What will be his message?
No, it's interesting. I've never followed JD Vance very much. I'm probably more in the old guard, the old establishment Republican Party. So this is all new for me as well. And I'm really excited to hear from him. And this is why. The way that we used to do Republican politics is that we would go for different demographics, right? We would look to expand in Hispanic community, for example. How do we appeal to traditionally Democratic demographics? And what I'm recognizing with the pick of Vance is that there's a new strategy at play, which is we're going for the working class Democratic voters, the people who've solidly been in the Democratic camp for a long time, union voters, people in the Rust Belt, the Blue Wall. And he's going straight to the heart of their concerns as somebody who grew up in poor, fentanyl-laced opioid abuse, sort of known for Appalachian Mountains, this totally different perspective on America that a lot of people can relate to that haven't traditionally been Republican voters. And I think the juxtaposition between his story, his personal story, and Kamala Harris's story of growing up in ivory towers with well-educated parents in the Bay Area of California, where I'm from, is going to be stark. And it's going to change the way people think about the Republican Party.
Well, Kurt, over to you. I mean, Denise just mentioned they're expanding to different demographics. Biden is speaking to Latino leaders today in Vegas. We know he was there yesterday speaking at events focused on Black voters. Both demographics this election cycle are showing waning support. Is the campaign doing enough to address the unique issues of this election versus kind of relying on what may have happened in past elections?
Well, I expect that the Biden-Harris ticket will amount a very vigorous and targeted approach to trying to court Black, Latino, as well as Asian American voters, for that matter. And I'll just point out that the only party that has ever had someone on their ticket that's not white is the Democratic Party. You look at the list of vice presidential nominees that we have had from the Republican Party, in my lifetime at least, it's been George H.W. Bush, Dan Quayle, we've had Dick Cheney, we've had obviously Sarah Palin, Mike Pence, now JD Vance. To me, it looks like a lineup of all the same type of people. So I'm not sure about expanding the reach of the Republican Party. If anything, I think that Trump's pick doubled down on the base, doubled down on the MAGA. He went with the most extreme choice when you look at either like a Tim Scott or Marco Rubio or Doug Burnham. He chose JD Vance. He chose the exact mirror of Trumpism to take that torch and be able to run with it beyond this election cycle. JD Vance is now the heir apparent to that MAGA faithful. So I don't think that this pick does anything to expand the Republican Party's opportunities with other demographics of voters, and they just left that open for the Biden-Harris ticket to do so. And Harris, being a woman of color, I think will have a lot more of an opportunity to shore up those numbers that have been sliding with those demographics than JD Vance will.
And Denise, I want to throw it back to you. I mean, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the Republican strategy right now, because, Kurt brought up that point of kind of doubling down on MAGA. That we know that there were these calls for unity, but is that only within the party itself? Because, apart from Nikki Haley last night, there's really been a lot of finger pointing at the other side of the aisle and what they say the Biden administration is getting wrong.
Yeah, I mean, enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And I think that at the end of the day, politics is sort of a competitive sport where you want to win. So regardless of whether you love your candidate or kind of can half stand him or don't like him at all, you still want to beat the other side. So there's that reality. But I do want to go back to something that Kurt said, because I think it does signal a shift and really the strength of Trump's campaign and sort of his strategy, which is that as the former head of Latino outreach for George W. Bush, that was my job on the first campaign for President George W. Bush, we had a very different strategy where we went after issues that we thought would appeal specifically to Hispanic voters, and it worked at the time. But what you're seeing with the Trump campaign is that he has transcended identity politics, because his positions, in fact, just the way that he ruled in the last 4 years prior to Biden were so much more prosperous for people of all backgrounds. And so they don't need you to pander to them. That's one of the most, I think, cheapest ways to go after votes, is to say, well, since you're Black or since you're Latino, we want to talk to you about these issues. No, we are all American citizens. We care about the same things. We care about being able to put food on our tables. And when you see that 67% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, but 73% of Black women are actually living paycheck to paycheck, and the disproportionate burden that falls on African-American, Latino, and traditionally Democratic voters, you can understand why, regardless of who he picks as a nominee, as his vice presidential running mate, they're going to vote for the person that actually helps them, not just because he has a Black or Latino face on the ticket.
Okay, I have a limited time, but I want to get one question in for each of you. Kurt, nearly 2/3 of Democrats, according to new polling, want Biden to step aside. Do you believe Biden will still be at the top of the ticket come November?
I think that's a tough question to answer right now. I think that if the polling changes at the Republican National Convention, if Trump gets more of a polling bump between the assassination attempt and the convention on top of each other, that gives a lot more ammunition for Democrats to make that case publicly that this is unwinnable for Biden. He needs to step aside.
And my last question for you, Denise, is the Trump campaign ready to pivot if Biden is not at the top of the ticket come November?
Yeah, I think that their dominant polling position now is so solidified, and it's really based on issues. It's based on the policies and how people perceived how they fared under President Trump as opposed to this Democratic administration, that I think they feel very confident in looking back on President Trump's record and how people feel about it now in retrospect, and saying we're going to stick with our strategy because it's working. I don't think that there's any new factor or new face that can be thrown into the mix that I've seen that would change anything for them. So I think you're seeing a winning strategy, and they're going to carry it over the finish line.
All right. Well, Denise Gittum, Kurt Bardella, nice little political panel there. Thank you both.